Hello and welcome to Dominion Seaside Previews. So, just a few short months after we got to see all of the Allies previews and then the actual drop of the Allies expansion, we've got another set of previews this week for the second edition of Dominion Seaside. So this is a really exciting Dominion year. Not only do we have that, but coming up, we're going to have Prosperity second edition as well. But for now, let's talk about Seaside second edition. So Donald X is going to be showing 3 cards today, tomorrow, and Wednesday that are replacing. Well, he's going to be showing 3 cards each day and what they're replacing, I guess is the way to say it. And he says that the overall goal was to remove bad cards and replace them with better cards, which, makes a lot of sense. And along the way, the percentage of the cards that are durations went up. In fact, all but one of the new cards are durations, and that's pretty exciting. So apparently this means there's twice as many durations as before, I guess. And he also said that Seaside is a bit low on draw, and now it has more draw. So let's look at the cards. So the first one we've got is Astrolabe. There were a set of blanks in Seaside that are getting removed. So this is just kind of like free real estate. So Astrolabe is a treasure duration, which at the time that Seaside was printed, of course, didn't exist. And in fact, we didn't get one until Contract, which just came out in Allies. So this is pretty new technology going into one of the older sets, which is pretty fun. So now, and at the start of your next turn, +1 coin, +1 buy. So as Donald X points out in his preview text, this is not something where you can avoid having it stay out. It's always going to stay out. And yeah, otherwise, pretty straightforward. It's duration pouch. Is that going to be worth it for 3? I think a lot of the time it will be. You get the effect every turn, and the effect is the same every turn. It's, as with many durations, it is going to be better the turn that it's in play versus the turn that you have to play it, because you don't have to draw it. So it only, on average costs you half a card to draw, that sort of thing. But even though, +1 coin and +1 buy isn't that exciting, it is non-terminal. The fact that it does only cost you half a card of draw makes it, preferable to the pouch. Obviously, you start with the pouch, and you don't have to spend a gain on it. So that's, a difference in the opportunity cost. But in terms of, how much you want to have it in your deck, it'll be preferable. And it is, frequently the case that you want +buy. There's going to be plenty of kingdoms where you don't need this. If you're playing Seaside and Wharf is in the kingdom, you're not probably going to need Astrolabe. But there will be, plenty of times when, if this is the +buy, then this is what you're going to want to pick up in order to get it. And it will be, a reliable source of +buy. The duration effect will definitely give you some amount of smoothing. If you end up needing multiple of these in order to get +buy, then you're going to try to alternate them, and it's probably not super important that you do so successfully. But if you do so successfully, then again, you're going to be a little bit more resilient in terms of the distribution of your +buy. How important is that really? I don't know. Maybe not that important, but so definitely not a super strong card in my opinion, but a useful card. All right, let's look at the next one, which is Blockade, which is replacing embargo. So embargo requires dedicated tokens, and blockade does not require tokens. So specifically, blockade says gain a card costing up to 4, setting it aside. At the start of your next turn, put it into your hand. While it's set aside, when another player gains a copy of it on their turn, they gain a curse. Okay. So the it's a workshop, and notably, you can't embargo just, or blockade, I should say. You can't blockade just anything. So you can't do things like, oh, my opponent got a potion, let me blockade the potion cost card. I got the first King's Court, I'm going to blockade the King's Courts. Well, you could do that with cost reduction in theory, but in practice, like, that's not going to come up very much. So the intended, functionality here is going to be pretty different, which is that if you're, it's a temporary thing where you're going to get like some tempo out of gaining some cheap card, and then having it be the case that your opponent doesn't want to gain that same card. It could be pretty strong with a card like, say, Stockpile, where you've each gotten, you probably opened with Stockpile, right? So you probably already have some stockpiles. Maybe they're in exile. You blockade Stockpile, and now your opponent doesn't want to take Stockpile and get their stockpiles out of exile because they don't want to take a curse, but you get to take your stockpiles out of exile. That's, like, off the top of my head, that's just kind of like one of the stronger interactions I can think of. But that sort of thing, I mean, they're still going to be able to get their stockpile eventually, right? Because after the next turn, you're going to put the stockpile into your hand, and then you're not going to be blockading it anymore. Of course, in theory, I guess you could, be playing a blockade every turn, like have two of them in your deck, playing one every turn, and keep blockading the same thing. But that seems unlikely to be worth it in practice, just to lock your opponent out, unless you would otherwise do it anyway, right? Like, the blockade effect seems like maybe less important than just like the actual gaining effect. And as far as that goes, it's not a very efficient gainer. Compared to, say, Importer, you do get to put the card into your hand the next turn. So I guess that's where it kind of shines. But Importer can gain you a 5 and costs 3. This can gain you a 4 and costs 4. It's like, and it's Importer is slow. This is slow. The fact that the card goes into your hand, though, maybe it's not actually as slow as I was initially thinking. Because, like, unless you're doing gain and play stuff, next turn is the soonest you could get the card into your hand anyway. The fact that you can't do this turn gain and play stuff is definitely relevant. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe there are plenty of cases where, like, you weren't going to be able to do gain and play anyway. So, I mean, it actually kind of acts as draw, right? You get the card into your hand. It's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like Conjurer, except that, where Conjurer puts itself into your hand so you can play it again. This is putting the gained card into your hand, and you could. I could go either way on, like, which one of those effects is better depending on the context. But yeah, I'm revising my thinking here now that I'm focusing on that aspect. And a thing you can do is, like, you can blockade the blockades to get a second blockade so that you can set up your, like, alternating blockades. If you have the deck control for it, that could be, like, a pretty smooth way to transition into doing, like, a consistent thing with those. But you get a blockade, you play it, you get another blockade, you play that, and now you start getting something useful into your hand every turn. Yeah, another card you could compare it to actually is Cobbler. Because Cobbler also puts the card into your hand. It's just that you don't have to choose what it is until the start of your turn, which is definitely better from a information standpoint, right? You can, I mean, like the obvious case, for example, with Cobbler is like, oh, I don't have a village, let me put a village into my hand. Oh, I don't have a draw card, let me put a draw card into my hand. You can't do that with Blockade because you don't know. But I think it is only a 4 cost, so it is going to be like easier to pick up than Cobbler, and it does have the attack aspect. So, and it is actually labeled as an attack. So attack immunity will nullify the effect, which is definitely going to be relevant sometimes. But yeah, I guess overall, if it's not obvious, like to me, the most interesting parts of this card are probably not actually the attack. Although I maybe I will feel differently about this when I actually see it in action. But having the effect only last for 1 turn, I mean, it's kind of like a very narrow Swamp Hag in that sense, where a Swamp Hag is like you buy anything. This is on gain, not on buy, but it's only one, from 1 pile. Kind of like having your opponent put a contraband into your deck if they blockade you. So you're like they're effectively naming that pile, something like that. Of course, I mean, obviously you have the choice to just go ahead and take the curse, but yeah. So I'm not expecting the attack effect to be super strong, but I guess we'll see whether it is or not. But despite where I started on this, where I'm landing on this on reflection, is that the gaining is actually pretty strong, even if the cursing doesn't end up being super relevant. All right, so finally we move on to the replacement for Ghost Ship. Not super surprising. I guess maybe it's also worth commenting on, I don't think anybody's surprised to see Embargo leaving. If you haven't been following the discussions on the Discord, you may be surprised to see Ghost Ship leaving if you were just expecting Seaside 2nd Edition to be a continuation of Base and Intrigue 2nd Editions, where only weak cards were replaced. But given that more cards are being replaced this time, I think the general expectation has been that some of the strong, oppressive, disliked cards would go, and Ghost Ship certainly fits that description. Donald X says that Ghost Ship actually won a most hated attack poll on Reddit, which I definitely don't sympathize with. I mean, Ghost Ship is definitely a brutal attack, but give me Ghost Ship over Swindler or Knights any day. Ghost Ship's not ever been on my ban list, but the trashing attacks I don't generally enjoy. So anyway, it says expert players may miss it, but it makes casual players miserable. Well, there you go. I don't know if I want to call myself an expert player, but I guess I'm not a casual player. I can say that much. You don't get to see your deck. That's the main thing. For Dominion and Intrigue 2nd Edition, weak cards left. For Seaside 2nd Edition, a few strong cards left too. Okay, so kind of saying the same thing. And then the replacement is Monkey. Monkey isn't even an attack. Seaside is following in the footsteps of later sets that are a little lighter on attacks. It's interactive, though. Well, let's see in what way it's interactive. Monkey until your next turn. When the player to your right gains a card, +1 card. At the start of your next turn, +1 card. Okay. You draw cards if they gain cards. They'll feel attacked. Take it from me. There you go. Yeah, they probably will. I can definitely see that. I mean, in a similar way, attacked is probably not the right word for it, but um, they'll feel the impact of it. I mean, with Goat Herd, there's the same thing. Like, is it worth trashing this card? They've got the Goat Herd, and they're going to draw cards. And Monkey's even more definitive in that you know it's in play. So you know every card you gain is going to trigger a draw for your opponent. You can think about Lost City, right? Is it worth getting a Lost City if it means my opponent draws a card? And now you have that for anything you're considering gaining, which Lost City is a really good card, right? So there's going to be, when you're thinking about taking a silver, it's like, oh gosh, I don't know if that's worth it. But of course, depending on when in the game you're talking about, you may not have much of a choice because you're going to have to gain something, right? You're not going to just like pass your turn because they have a monkey in play. So I think that the balance is going to be different than it is for Lost City, probably. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be, I mean, it's almost, I talked about Swamp Hag with Blockade. There's a kind of sort of similar thing here. I mean, again, Swamp Hag only applies to buys, but where it's going to, instead of just thinking, no, I can, get as much, I'll just get as much stuff as I can get. Essentially, you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to get nothing more than I really, really need. At the start of your next turn, +1 card means that if nothing else, if your opponent just passes their turn, then it still replaces itself. But obviously, if that's all that's happening, it's not very good. I mean, it's going to be pretty rare that your opponent gains nothing on their turn. It does happen, of course. There's people sometimes are going to activate exploration or baths, or they're going to just go on a mission or whatever, depending on where you are in the game. But I mean, I think very, very, very often you're going to minimum draw one card during your opponent's turn and then one card at the start of your turn. So it is net draw. Although, I mean, if that is all that you get, it's like a terminal, sort of better than moat, sort of worse, depending on how you look at it. The thing that makes it better than moat is like drawing the 2 cards at the start of your turn is stronger than drawing them during your turn. The thing that makes it worse is that it's like it's slower, right? You're only gonna be able to take advantage of it every other turn. And drawing one of the cards during your opponent's turn, and thus having your hand size increase before the start of your turn rather than at the start of your turn, means that it's subject to some of the same downsides all of the same downsides, pretty much. I take that back. Some of the same downsides is Way of the Squirrel. I was going to say all the same downsides, but really, there's going to be a lot of times when your opponent can't counter your increased hand size because by the time they're gaining cards, they can't play a hand size attack anymore. So actually, yeah, I mean, it's actually going to be fairly difficult in the common case to be able to do that. Like, you play Militia and then you go to your buy phase and you buy cards, and they draw more cards. Like, it's going to be in general pretty difficult to first gain your cards and then play the Militia. If you can do it, then Monkey's going to be pretty bad. But usually that's not going to be the case, and so usually Monkey is going to be more similar to start of turn duration draw than like end of turn duration draw like Squirrel. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, so that sort of baseline case where you're drawing 2 cards at the start of your turn is not super strong, in my opinion. But if you can get like any more than that, then it starts to get, you know, quite strong. You can compare it to like Haunted Woods, for example, draws you 3 cards at the start of your turn, and is a 5 cost. I mean, it has an attack on it as well. Similarly, Highwayman, 3 cards at the start of your turn, also has an attack on it, and the whole cycling, you know, like discard it, you know, so that you can play it again thing. But those are both 5 costs. Yeah, and so if you know if Monkey can realistically get you 2 cards per turn, or sorry, two cards from your opponent plus the card that you would get anyway. So 3 cards total. I think it starts to look very nice. And obviously the other consideration is, you know, even if it does only draw the 1 card, if the reason it's from your opponent, if the reason it's doing that is because your opponent is not gaining stuff because they don't want to feed your monkey, then like that's also very effective. And of course, you can also, if you've got enough plus actions, you can play multiple of these per turn, and then everything that they gain is going to draw you multiple cards, and that's going to start to be really like that. It really will probably feel a lot like an attack, as he said, as Donald X said, in a way that doesn't even really apply to Goat Herd, probably. So I mean, and there are definitely going to be games, I imagine, with Monkey where at some point you just give up on the idea that your opponent isn't just going to draw their deck. And it's just going to be like, whatever. They're going to draw their deck with the monkeys. I'm going to draw my deck with the monkeys. And all that really matters, like, I need to gain, you know, more payload. And that's like the important thing. I need to more efficiently, you know, gain payload and then gain green and whatever. Although in a game like that, then there will be probably an interesting interplay of, okay, so is there like a point where all of a sudden I just don't gain stuff? Like I buy like maybe 1 province, or, you know, something, maybe you know, maybe not even that. I don't know if that works. I mean, I guess if you have some alt VP source that doesn't require gaining, like Bishop or I don't know. I'm struggling to think of something else that would give you like a decent amount, like, you know, a bunch of monuments or something. But if you have those already, then, you know, that's what you're doing. Presumably, you would have already been playing with them. But in any case, maybe 1 province is like little enough. The point being that, like, it could be interesting to get into an endgame scenario where you try to shut down your opponent's deck. Like you've previously conceded that they're going to draw their deck because they have a bunch of monkeys in play, and you just gain whatever, and you just don't worry about it. And then all of a sudden you like turn off the faucet for 1 turn, and maybe their deck just completely falls apart. So that could be a thing that happens. There's a kind of similar dynamic that can come up. It's rare with Goat Herd. I played a game at one point that was like Goat Herd and Tomb, where King's Court was on the board and Goat Herd was like the only draw, and so like you needed to trash in order to score. But if you didn't trash, then your opponent wouldn't be able to draw on their turn, which was really interesting. And the other thing I was thinking of is when there's like Treasure Hunter with like Conquest or Triumph, or one of the cards that like synergizes with the mass silver gaining, where like if you kind of like turn off the faucet for 1 turn, then all of a sudden like your opponent can't do anything. Although there it's not about draw, it's about scoring. But I think there will be some interesting stuff with Monkey there. It seems like a very very like crunchy tactical card. So it should be pretty cool. Anyway, so these should all be up now on Dominion.games to play with as previews. And then there will be more previews, as I said, the next 2 days. The last day, there's going to be miscellaneous minor errata discussion, which I may or may not make a video about, depending on... I mean, I'll definitely read it and be interested in it, but I don't know how interesting it will be to talk about in video format. But I'll make that call when we get there. And then I'm assuming that the actual set will be available. I don't know, maybe next week or something like that. I don't know if it's actually been mentioned anywhere. If I find out, I'll mention it tomorrow. But in any case, yeah, there you go. Previews for Seaside 2nd edition. Exciting stuff. This is, like I said, a crazy, exciting year for Dominion. It's awesome. So thanks for watching, and look forward to tomorrow for more previews. Until then.